Okay, so let's start this first video about producing the training data from the BIM model. So here you see an overview of the different weeks of our construction benchmark dataset. And if we take a look at week 22, you notice that we have different folders, both for the BIM, the imagery, the mesh, and the point clouds. Now, before we can start to segment the point cloud labels, we actually have to produce the ground truth data from the BIM model. And that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to use Revit to produce those labels. So if we take a look in our BIM folder, you will notice that we have a Revit file. We have a set of OBJ files that you can also see over here that mark the different construction phases that we have defined. And we have a status JSON that you also see on the right, which contains the different IFC GUIDs for the elements that are unseen, unconstructed, and so forth. Now, I mentioned this because we define 4 progress stages in our benchmark dataset. You can find them at the root directory. They are namely the progress classes from unassigned, which is 255, 0 is unseen, unconstructed, under construction, and constructed. Those are the progress classes that we define. Now, before we can start our BIM ground truth, we first have to copy our BIM model and place it in the correct location. So for every epoch, we are actually gonna set up a new Revit file. So if you go into the different weeks, you will see that we have a BIM week 21 that we copy to week 22. That's of course because we want to use the last stage of the element status to produce the new labels. So we copy first this Revit file and name it week 22. That's what we're seeing right here. This is actually week 23. And the next thing that we have to do is import the point cloud. If I go here to insert and I go to manage links, I can actually load and unload this point cloud. For instance, this is week 23. I will unload this. So this is our BIM model. Now, if it's the first time that you create the BIM model, it's very important that we already create the views for the different statuses. Here you can see on the right-hand side in the project browser, I make 4 views: unseen, not constructed, under construction, and constructed, that correspond to the different phases that they are built. Now, the phases is actually the Revit phasing that we use. For instance, here I'm in the not constructed view, so we are at the phase unconstructed. If you want to change the phases, you can do so at manage phases, and here you can create different phases. The default ones are new situation or existing situation. So you create all 4 stages, you create the views, and you set them at the correct phase. So the start of this BIM protocol is where we have 4 views, each with their own stage. Now, for the insertion of the point cloud, we cannot import our loss file directly. If I take a look here at week 23, at my point cloud, I have a loss file. I cannot insert it. I first have to transform it to a recap point cloud format. So if we fire up recap, we can actually create a new project where we import a point cloud in the location of week 23 PCD. We select this folder and we name it week 23 SVM, and then we import the loss file. Now this will automatically create the desired RCP file that I have over here. And this RCP file can be linked in the Revit on the Insert tab, Manage Links, or Insert Point Cloud. And you link the RCP file based on the shared coordinates. Now this is unloaded. I will actually reload my link from here because I have loaded it before. So if I reload my link, I should be able to view my point cloud. Now the phase in which you load it is important because now this point cloud will be part of the unconstructed phase. Now normally you can select this entity. If you have problems with this, you have to modify the selection tool on the top left. For instance, here I can mark the select links, allowing me to select the point cloud and change its phase, for instance, from unconstructed to under construction and so forth. But for now, let's keep it at the unconstructed level. And the next thing that we should do is actually take a look at all of our elements over here. Now, some elements you want to show, some you don't want to show. If you want to modify this, you modify the visibility settings, namely you press VV, then you go into the visibility settings and you only mark the primary and secondary building elements that we want to assign. If you're unsure which classes are part of the benchmark, you go to the root folder. Here at the classes.json are the different classes that we use, namely we use the structural element, which is undefined, but we use columns, beams, slabs, walls, stairs, and roofs. Curtain walls is also a primary element. And then for the secondary element, we currently have just an arbitrary secondary element, or we have ceilings, doors, windows, railings, MEP installation, furniture, and that's it. So those typically are the classes that you want to show over here. If you want to show the columns, typically they're not marked as columns, but actually structural columns, and the beams are structural framing. So I have my elements visible over here, and I can take a look at each of these elements and decide whether they should change state. For instance, here I have a number of beams that were unconstructed before, but as you can see, their rebar is actually being fletched, so that means that they are currently under construction. If I take a look at the overall revit, the RCP, that doesn't want to load momentarily. But it's quite clear from the drawing that here is in fact a rebar beam present. So if I mark these beams, I can go to the phasing, which is currently unconstructed, and I change both the demolished and the created phase. So first the demolished one, I go to under construction, and the phase created also goes to under construction. So they will disappear now because this is a phase of not constructed. Here as well, this beam is obviously under construction. This beam is not under construction, but these beams are in fact. If you want to mark multiple elements, you can press the control key, hold it down and mark multiple elements. So all of these slab elements are in fact under construction. Now here we are missing some elements. Probably they were already constructing them in the previous weeks. So these are all part of the under construction tab. So now if you feel confident that all the elements in fact have their proper phasing, then we want to export the OBJ. So for that, we go, for instance, to the constructed stage. We make the link invisible just for now. Or I can actually also do that just in the visibility settings. That will be faster. So here with point clouds, so these are all the elements that are already constructed. If I now go to File, Export, CAD formats, OBJ, I can export in meters in the BIM location. So week 23 BIM, and here you just preserve this name. Just make sure it's marked that it's the constructed stage, and we press OK, and that will export all of the elements from our BIM model in the current view. So you do this for each of the 4 views, which will result in week 23 having all these OBJ files that I showed in Cloud Compare. Now the final step is also to export this JSON file that I showed over here, the status JSON file, and for that you go to Manage, Dynamo, and you use the export identifiers script. In fact, the retrieve IFC-GUID script, which is again located at the root folder here with code. You have the retrieve IFC-GUID's Dynamo script. So when we enter this Dynamo environment, we say that we trust this location. And we have some performance issues. Let me reestablish the connection because I'm working on a remote desktop. And you see that our script is currently loaded. Now, very importantly, this running screen should be set to manual because otherwise all of the elements will be automatically selected and exported to the JSON file. Now, if I am able to zoom in, you can see what the Python script, the Dynamo script does. Namely, it takes a look at the 4 different views: unseen, not constructed, under construction, and constructed. It's very important that the name corresponds to the correct view, so don't make any typos there. This Python script gathers all of the elements that are in that view of the present visibility settings, and it retrieves the IFC GUID from these elements. Now it builds the dictionary that you can see over here. Namely, we have 4 objects, one for unseen, one for unconstructed, and so forth. And it sets all of the IFC GUIDs in that dictionary. Now, as a final status that you should set, currently the file path is set to week 22 BIM status JSON. Of course, this should be week 23 when we change this file path over here. And then you can run the file and it will export this JSON. So that's it for the production of the OBJs, the JSON, and the revit file that will be used to segment the point cloud. Thanks.